All right, welcome everyone to a Design X Technology lecture. I'm Justin Famularo. I'm professor in product and mobility here. Today we have Alejandra Castelao. She started her career in Mexico City after graduating from Tecnológico de Monterrey, designing for Esware Studio. I met Alex at CCS MFA, where her critical thinking and storytelling abilities had a profound effect on me. After 2 years in Detroit, Alejandra made her way to San Francisco, where she worked at prestigious design firms like Frog, and but also healthcare startups, now strategy and experience. I'm excited to hear about her journey. Thank you for joining us, Alejandra. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Justin. And thank you guys for being here. I know that it's snowing outside and you guys braved the storm, and I really, really appreciate you coming here in person. This is actually my first time visiting Lawrence Tech, so super excited. I just got a tour and excited to meet you all and have dinner later. My name is Alejandra Castelao, like Justin mentioned, but y'all can call me Alex. And I'm currently a senior experience design lead at Dolby Labs in San Francisco, California. In today's lecture, I'm going to take you through my journey from craft to strategy. So first, a little bit about me. I spent the last over 15-ish years working across industrial design, user experience design, and design strategy. And over the course of that time, I've had the opportunity to work on a wide range of different products, services, experiences across industries like healthcare, hospitality, retail, and now mostly entertainment and audiovisual tech. And that journey has taken me from working for giant Fortune 500 companies like the Googles, the Samsungs of the world, as well as super tiny, stealthy early stage startups, always trying to figure out different creative ways to translate big, ambitious, or ambiguous ideas into reality. And today I've come to kind of identify myself more of a multidisciplinary designer, more so than a traditional industrial designer, which is my formal background. Always trying to draw from a mix of different tools and methods from different disciplines that I've kind of picked up along the way. And so I'll be taking you through my journey, and I'll share some lessons that I've learned over the years. And I'll talk to you about how I've evolved from being more of a specialist and focusing on creating physical, tactile types of objects like consumer electronics and furniture, to what I do now, which is trying to tackle the more complex problems, always by embracing curiosity, collaboration, and adaptability. And I'll be highlighting the opportunities that I see for other generalists like myself out there who would want to carve out their own paths in this dynamic and ever-evolving field that is technology and innovation, without necessarily fitting into like a specific box or a specialty. And so before I dive in, and taking advantage of the fact that we have a few folks in the audience, which I'm really happy about, can I get like super quick show of hands just to kind of get to know folks in the room? If anybody here is studying industrial design? Okay, a couple. About any other type of design, interaction, UI, UX. Oh, okay. No UI, UXers, that's kind of wild. I usually work with a lot of them. How about any engineers in the room? Mechanical, electronical, or electric engineer, software engineers? All right. Okay, so what's your major? What are you guys working on? Architecture? Yeah. Oh, okay, a lot of architects. Okay, cool. Love working with architects, by the way. Well, usually in the professional world, it's very rare when you get to work with only folks from your own discipline. You get to collaborate across different types of teams, and this is partly the reason why I believe a multidisciplinary approach matters so much today. Because no matter what discipline we come from, if we're designers, if we're architects, if we're engineers, even if we're focused on marketing or business development, our main focus is solving problems for users. That's kind of like at the heart of everything we do, no matter what. And user experience, like you kind of see in this crazy diagram that I have up here, it sits at the intersection of all of these disciplines, whether they're physical, they're digital, they're immersive, they're research and higher level. And as our technology kind of grows more and more complex over time, so do these problems, these user problems that we're trying to solve. And solving them requires a collaboration across a bunch of different types of folks, different disciplines or cross-disciplinary teams. So if we look at this diagram again, if you look at all these craziness and all the different circles overlapping and stuff, if you want to launch a product, a service, or an experience today, chances are that your team is going to start looking kind of like this at any point during the process of product development or experience development. And what happens is that, obviously we all kind of have a background, we all have a core, we all have something that we went to school for. And when we focus on our specialties, which is something that you tend to do, especially when you're just kind of getting started, our view of the whole problem tends to be pretty narrow. We kind of put horse blinders on almost naturally, and we look down at the things that we have in front of us, right? Like our priorities, our goals, our deliverables, what we're going to be doing for the next couple of weeks. And this can make building a shared vision and looking sideways to a bigger picture a huge challenge. And to me, I kind of find that challenge really exciting because I see it as an opportunity. Because it's been my experience that generalists, like what I turn out to be, can play a key role in looking sideways and kind of bridging the gaps in between these teams, bringing folks together, kind of diving into different disciplines that go beyond your core and fostering alignment. So another quick show of hands, but how many of you guys have had a chance to work with a different discipline, whether it's here in school or for first internship, or if you've had a chance to have your first job? So a couple hands, all right. That's great, that's awesome. Honestly, when I went to school, I had very, very little chances or opportunities to work with other disciplines. I had a couple projects with engineers, maybe one or two with business majors, but nothing that would really prepare me for what collaborating in a professional world can be, because that is usually the norm. It's very rare when you get to work on something only with folks from your own discipline. And that's what gets me really excited about multidisciplinary design. So before I dive into lessons and all this stuff, I'm going to go back a little bit, tell you a little bit about my background and how I got here. Because in the beginning of my career, I was very much a specialist. I was born and raised in Mexico City, like Justin mentioned, and I got my bachelor's in industrial design there. And then shortly after, I started to fall in love with furniture and the design of spaces. And I was super lucky. I got a chance to land a job in one of the most renowned furniture design and interior design or studios in the country, called Rawe Studio. And over the course of my time there, we worked on a ton of different new pieces. Stuff for exhibitions and kind of one-off pieces like the one that you see here, but also things that were for boutique hotels and restaurants that are still in production or open to the public today. And designing furniture and spaces, it taught me a lot about a couple of different things. First off, just the beauty of just rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty, and that hands-on craftsmanship that involves working with wood, working with metal, working with raw materials. It also taught me a lot about a good foundation for my process when it comes to design. Because when you're designing furniture or interiors, it's kind of a process that is fairly linear, and it's also very repeatable, right? Because you kind of, in a way, you're building the same thing over and over again. It might look different, or the brief might be a little bit different depending on what type of space you're building, but it's something that can really build that solid foundation. And finally, collaboration. Because like I mentioned, that I love working with architects, so this is when I started truly working and collaborating with architects. I worked with architects, with hotel owners, with investors, with carpenters, just across the board, right? And so that was my very first experience of trying to dip my feet into a couple of different buckets. But I was still very much a specialist, right? My jam was furniture. And after a few years, the tech world was kind of calling and like pulling me in. And so I decided to leave my home country and I moved to the States for grad school. And I was looking for like programs for grad school that would in a way complement my more traditional skill set and my more traditional background in industrial design, but mainly furniture. And so I got accepted at CCS over in Detroit for the interdisciplinary class. I think it has a different name now, I don't even know. Something, which is where I met Justin. And you know, to be honest, like my time at grad school was great, but it was also super, super humbling because I just realized how much I didn't know about everything that surrounds a physical product or a physical object. Which was the whole point of, you know, looking around for these types of interdisciplinary programs, right? So I learned a ton about UI and UX and, you know, all sorts of things about how we interact with technology, which to me back then, and this is to date me quite a bit, but this is, you know, before touchscreens were everywhere, and before the iPhone took over, and before, you know, our whole lives kind of got upended by a bunch of apps. So this was just completely new information for me. I learned a lot about user research, going out on the field, trying to get, you know, a sense of how people behave and how they interact with a service or with a product. Learn about a bunch even about marketing and business that were like just completely foreign. And I was also surrounded by folks that were a lot younger than me and could sketch out a car with their eyes closed. And, you know, it was pretty humbling for sure because I had already been working for a while, for a few years at that point, but in many ways, I just felt like I was just getting started and I felt like I was falling behind. But it also lit a fire under my butt and I just wanted to absorb everything. Like every single thing that had to do with design was just really interesting to me. And I wanted to like be a little sponge and, you know, absorb little methods, little tools and stuff from all the different disciplines that I was learning about. And a little bit about, or before graduation, I got a job offer from Frog Design. And so I packed up all my bags and moved to the other side of the country to San Francisco, which is where I've been living ever since. And in the beginning of my 4 years there, my main focus was product development. I was part of the product development team with a few mechanical engineers, a few EEs, a bunch of us industrial designers, and our main focus was consumer electronics. So still within the realms of like fairly traditional industrial design. And it was a very interesting time in the industry. This was like back in 2010, 2012. And a lot of things were happening at that time, again, with the, you know, the new innovations of, you know, consumer electronics like smartphones and touchscreens and iPads and like all this stuff happening all over the place. And I could feel, or I experienced like firsthand, you know, that shift from physical to digital when it came to a lot of the design shops in the Bay Area like Frog, but also kind of nationwide and worldwide. You know, everybody was talking about the next app, the next digital experience, the next website, the next this, the next that. And then, you know, the physicality of the object started kind of taking a back seat. And so before long, I started kind of dipping my feet beyond just the product development team into experience design, design strategy, even research. And what allowed me to do this was that, you know, Frog kind of had this holistic view of design, where if you raised your hand and you kind of wanted to participate, like they would allow you to have that experience as well, because our teams were really slim. So, you know, we would put together a team depending on the challenge that walked through the door, you know, depending on like what the client needed at that time. And it was very rare when you got to work with another industrial designer or somebody from your own team. They were 100% multidisciplinary. So we got to work with folks from strategy, folks from interaction design, folks from UI, UX. And you kind of just got to soak it all in, which was my very first professional introduction to this new type of collaboration, this multidisciplinary type of approach. It allowed me to travel all over the world, which is awesome. It also gave me a chance to work with some really interesting clients like Google, like Apple, like Samsung. but also teeny tiny startups through the Ventures program at Frog, like Oculus before they got acquired by Meta. And this experience of working with startups kind of opened my eyes a little bit. And after a few years, I started kind of like feeling the pull towards working on something more end-to-end, which is really tough when you work at a consultancy. It's obviously good and bad with everything. When you work for a consultancy or a design studio, especially in your formative years, it's awesome because you get to wear a bunch of different hats. You get to work on tons of different projects at the same time. So you might work on like a healthcare type of program, and then 3 months later you're working in hospitality, and then all of a sudden you're working on an action camera or something for bikes. But it's very rare to actually see something all the way to launch. You at some point have to like throw it over the fence, and then the company, their internal teams kind of take it from there. And so this was something that I definitely wanted to explore. So I left my dream job at Frog and ended up joining a healthcare startup called Forward. And the whole idea behind Forward was to try to envision a new kind of doctor's office. One where, on the one hand, we could bring world-class doctors and world-class medical teams, and then pair them up with advanced technology to sort of give them superpowers in a way, so that they could see more patients, but not just see them, or not just see more patients, but give them better care, more proactive care. So instead of waiting for you to, get sick and then try to, bring you back to health, how can we find ways to keep you healthy? And this is back in 2016, so these types of things were still very new. Now, there's even apps that kind of like, track what you're eating, and like you can, take a urine test like from the comfort of your own bathroom. But back then it was still pretty novel because the healthcare industry is like one of those industries that is really tough to crack and really tough to innovate because the incentives aren't quite there for you to, give a better type of care or kind of like go outside of the status quo. And so I thought this was awesome. I thought the idea was really interesting. So I joined the team, super early stage. We didn't even have a name. I was one of the first like handful of employees. And as the only physical anything designer, I had the chance to design the full experience, both the back of the house, so like the experience for the medical team, as well as the front of the house, which is the experience that is mainly for our patients. And in the beginning, we were just living in full ambiguity. Like there's no certainty about anything because a lot of the ideas that we were coming up with had never been done before. And so there wasn't really like a frame of reference for a lot of this stuff. And a lot was getting lost in translation in the very beginning. We were talking about ideas at a high level. We were brainstorming with leadership. We had, influence from like our investors. But nobody was kind of like speaking the same language. And so what I started kind of noticing was that opportunity. Like, how can we bring folks together? How can we make this tangible? How can we, try to connect the dots in between a little bit better? And so what I started doing was, instead of focusing only on the physicality of the clinic itself, which is what I was basically hired to do, I kind of went beyond that and focused on the user experience from end to end instead. So what happens before you even make it to the clinic? What happens when you're in the clinic or when you receive care remotely? What happens afterwards? And not only that, but I started taking all of these ideas that were coming up from all over the place in our internal teams, and I started making them tangible to make sure that we were all kind of, going back to the same vision, and we had something to anchor ourselves to. And so I ended up illustrating and rendering every single moment in that user experience. I pitched kind of my vision for it to our founders. Got a chance to get a little bit of budget, or I would say a lot of budget, to build a full prototype clinic so that we could actually see and test and feel not only the new service that we were wanting to provide to our would-be patients, but also test out all of the custom hardware that we were building for this space. We had body scanners, we had these interactive, giant screens where you could collaborate with your doctor. We had a ton of stuff in the back of the house. And so building that, making it tangible, making it graspable, allowed us to bridge those gaps and actually point at things that were working or weren't working. And it even allowed us to bring investors through, which meant that we, could give them an actual proof of what it was that they were throwing their money at. And it allowed us to bring in patients and actually see patients months before we opened our first location, which was invaluable from the service side of things because our doctors and our nurse practitioners and our medical team could actually have that experience with the patients and with all this new technology before we opened doors. And so we ended up actually shipping our first clinic in 10 months, which was just pure insanity. And it also provided a path for us to keep iterating within that prototype clinic to make sure that each new location was better than the last, and then figure out how to make it more efficient, drop cost, and make it easier for us to keep launching new locations. So this experience right here at Forward really kind of solidified my approach as a multidisciplinary designer. And kind of, it's just kind of the nature of working for a startup. You get to, wear a bunch of different hats. You end up potentially working on stuff that you weren't hired to do. And it's just, it's all eyes on the prize and making it to launch day, which was just an amazing experience for me. And this is when I also started noticing, the need for a connector type of role like this. Not just in Forward, but in other types of companies as well. Bringing teams together, focusing on really visual, really tangible storytelling to ultimately de-risk decision-making and keep teams moving quickly when you have tight deadlines like this. Now, sadly, like most startups in the world, or 8 out of 10, this unicorn didn't quite make it. So after 8 years, it shut down a couple months ago. And it also kind of took with it my early dreams of, or dreams of early retirement. But still, hands down, best thing I've ever worked on, most rewarding project ever. And professionally for me, it was kind of an aha moment, because this is when I said, okay, this is my jam. I want to keep doing this, maybe not just for Forward, maybe for other companies, but there's something here that I want to pursue. And so after Forward, I went back to consulting, and I led the Connected Products and Spaces team at Accenture. And Accenture is one of the biggest consultancies in the world. It's just completely massive. And as part of Accenture, because it is so massive, I had the pleasure of working with really cool clients like Nike, Disney, Virgin, Meta, Marriott, you name it, a ton of different ones. And I focused on kind of what I was doing at Forward, whenever there was an ambiguous problem or something out of the ordinary, especially if it potentially required some sort of physical touch point, then I would get pulled in. So for example, we were working with a lot of retail clients during the pandemic and after the pandemic, trying to figure out what their new brick and mortar strategies could be once COVID upended everything, and we could in the retail environment completely change the way we shop. They would come to us for advice on how to bridge the gap between physical and digital experiences inside a store. So that type of project. And again, I kind of reached into my designer tool belt. I used a ton of different types of tools and methods, like alignment workshops, brainstorming activities, just tons of visual communication and storytelling to put together creative briefs for what I like to call top of the funnel types of projects. And by top of the funnel, I kind of mean sometimes clients come to you not really knowing what they're looking for. They might think that they have a problem that is worth solving, but then after you do your due diligence and you start diving into user challenges and you kind of do your, your research and you dive in and you do stakeholder interviews, you end up finding that the challenge that they thought that they should solve is actually not as big as an opportunity as something else that you uncovered. And so not only this, but making them more creative and more visual. So giving them a taste of what these potential solutions or potential ideas could look like, could feel like in real life, so that instead of the client going ahead and pulling the trigger on like a massive budget to build something that may or may not be the right solution, you kind of help them make a more informed decision before that happens. So that's the type of work I was doing at Accenture, and I did that for a few years, kind of carving out a role for myself that I don't think existed beforehand. And it's pretty much what I do at Dolby now. So I'm at Dolby Labs, and now I kind of do all this, but for a single client, because I'm in-house. And for those of you who are not super familiar with the company, or maybe you've seen the logo here and there, because it's kind of like all over the place. But really, like, Dolby has been the leader of anything audiovisual technology for the past 60 plus years. And while we don't actually produce any physical products, we have a giant ecosystem of partners that do. And so what we do is basically create the tools for creating the content, basically licensing the technologies as well, then enable all of these experiences. And they're everywhere you look. If you have an iPhone, Dolby's there. If you go to the movies, Dolby's there. If you have a home theater or even go to a live concert, our technology is probably there as well. And what I do at Dolby is help connect the dots between our R&D teams and our marketing teams. And so I basically try to translate all of our cutting-edge technology that our R&D teams are constantly developing and try to look at it from a user-centered point of view, so that we make sure that all of the technology that we're developing is not just for innovation for innovation's sakes, but that it actually is purposeful. It kind of sits in the sweet spot between our company's strategic goals, real human challenges or human problems or needs, and the innovations and the priorities that our internal teams are working towards. So it's a little bit about me and my journey, and how I've kind of carved out this non-conventional path for myself. And for the next few minutes, I'd just like to leave you with some actionable lessons that I've learned over the years. And each of these five lessons has guided me throughout my career, any moment. If some of the stuff that I already presented to you so far resonates, I hope that these lessons can inspire you and help you navigate your own path. So the first one is trust your process. This is probably going to look pretty familiar for any designers, any architects in the room. Nothing new here. Pretty basic framework for human-centered design type of process. The fun part comes in the tools and the methods and how you adapt this kind of flexible framework to whatever it is that you're trying to pull off at any stage of the project, depending on the challenges of each project that you try to tackle.
Alejandra,
Yeah.
can I take a photo of that?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, none of this is proprietary. I mean, I guess like the photos of my work, if you want to just add my name to them, totally fine. But none of this is like mind-blowing or proprietary, so feel free. And so what I mean about having like a solid foundation in your process, but then, giving yourself enough room for adaptability is the core of the process kind of stays the same. If I'm designing furniture or if I'm designing like an immersive experience in virtual reality, the core kind of stays the same, still follow the same phases. But then the tools and the methods change depending on the output that I need, depending on where I'm at with that project. So here's kind of an example. So how I trust the process, I know that I mentioned that I tend to work on more top of the funnel types of stuff now. I focus on defining the problem first. So I invest super heavily in the discover and define phase, first and foremost. Aligning stakeholders before even imagining potential solutions. So I don't even it definitely takes a lot of patience and a lot of restraint, but I don't even get close to like a pen or a pencil until I actually figure out what it is that we're trying to do, what it is that we're trying to tackle. What are the user challenges? Where can we find opportunity? What should we prioritize? And then you start ideating. Then you start actually getting all your creative juices and brainstorming with folks. So for the following phases, after the discover and define phase, kind of adapt my tools and my methods as needed. So I'll give you an example. Like right now for Dolby, I'm working on a vision program to try to figure out what the future of automotive and Dolby could be. So how can we leverage our technology inside of a car to kind of enable new experiences for entertainment, which is our jam, but also beyond entertainment. And so after doing all my due diligence, bringing folks together, running a bunch of workshops, trying to figure out, what's your team's priorities, what type of technology are we developing right now, what are the, sort of like the juiciest parts or like the opportunities that kind of have the most legs. After that, for the ideation phase, once we kind of had an idea of like a few concepts that were catching up steam, that people were resonating towards, I started just bringing together a bunch of different ideas into an animated video. And the reason why I did this was because I still needed to share it more broadly with stakeholders, both internally and externally with potential partners. And a PowerPoint deck was just not gonna cut it. Like people just don't have that attention span usually. And so in 3 minutes, we could convey a consolidated vision of what we thought was gonna be the next 3 to 5 years for Dolby. And we're gonna be leveraging this for the upcoming phases of this process as stimulus for consumer research on the one hand, but also to try to align with our potential partners and try to get a better direction before we actually go ahead and spend money on prototyping, testing this, and then launching some sort of product. But if I were to like work on something different, like say like an immersive type of experience, like a few years ago at Accenture, I was working on designing some spaces meant for remote collaboration and virtual reality. So for that, very different output, but still same core process. It's just the tools are different. I started jumping into Gravity Sketch a lot sooner, started kind of like cutting out a bunch of different spaces, started even like storyboarding in virtual reality so I could bring people into my room, like quite literally, so we could walk through a full experience so that, folks in leadership that didn't have kind of like the chops, you would say, to build stuff like this, they could still experience it. They could still have like a gut reaction, give us feedback. If it's something like experiential marketing, like I'm building a booth for a show or something like that to build a demo, probably like elevations or renderings and sketches are enough for me to like send it off to an agency to go build it. So the tools and the methods change, but it's still the same process. And it doesn't matter if you're building furniture, if you're building physical, digital experiences, immersive, still the same foundation. So always trust your process. And second lesson is all about connecting the dots. And by connecting the dots, I mean try to reach out, bridge the gaps in between teams, disciplines, and perspectives. One common challenge that I've encountered, no matter where I've worked at, this is kind of like across the board, is that a lot of the times when you're working on technology and innovation, there's a big gap or a big disconnect in between strategic thinking and then execution teams, or teams that are actually going to like go ahead and build stuff. Because leadership teams or folks in marketing or strategy, will often focus on the why, like why something should be built, right? Business plans, research, trends, insights. It's like there's something here, there's potential here, all the markers are there, but they focus on the why we should be in the space without kind of describing properly like the what, right? Like what this solution could potentially be, or how we get there, how do, the pathways to actually make it real. And so these teams, run the risk of just like spinning their wheels a ton and having tons of iteration loops until whatever, the build team is creating starts resonating with what strategy and leadership kind of have in mind. And this is the role that I try to play in my teams, and the role that I've seen other designers like myself play in these teams, where if we focus on bringing folks together and reducing these iteration loops to try to have folks like speak the same language across disciplines. I do this personally by communicating ideas as tangibly as possible. If it's visuals, if it's prototypes, if it's models, if it's like an immersive virtual reality walkthrough, whatever it might be, so that people can feel and almost like grasp the ideas, it's really, really effective. Like, never underestimate the power of great visual storytelling. Because when you make all of these abstract concepts visual or graspable, it gives people a frame of reference. And on the one hand, for non-visual thinkers who usually, they tend to sit in more like leadership positions or strategic teams, they can better see the potential of these ideas. So you make it easier for them to make well-informed decisions. And on the other hand, it clarifies to build teams and execution teams like 3D artists, Unity developers, software developers. I've worked down to with audio engineers and musical composers and stuff in some of these projects. It gives them a lot more clarity in terms of what they're supposed to be building. So you ultimately save time, save resources, and you save a lot of effort. Next, I'm just going to talk about the importance of collaboration. Kind of goes hand in hand with bridging gaps. But in this sense, it's just to get out there and never shy away from the opportunity to learn more about the folks that you're working with, especially folks from different backgrounds who have different disciplines, who have different perspectives. It's so, so, so important because if you seek folks from outside of your immediate bubble, right, outside of your team, outside of your discipline, and you take them out for a chat, but mainly you listen to what they have to say. You try to learn about how they work, their tools, their priorities, down to the terminology that they use. Like right now that I'm working with a lot of R&D teams, they tend to be super, super technical, and they'll tell me terms that I've never even heard before about audio waves and visual, HDRs and crazy terminology around formatting. But if you take the time and you actually learn, from them, it makes it so much easier to communicate these ideas in a way that they can understand. And for you, you can also share what you bring to the table, right? You can show your awesome superpowers, like your sketching powers, your ideation powers, if you love creating models or whatever, you can show them what you can bring to the table and then try to find common ground or shared goals. And it'll just make everything a lot more powerful no matter what. And it's obviously easier said than done because it's 10,000 times easier to just work with people that share your own background or folks that you see every day in your team. It's just easier. But it's definitely worth it to push yourself outside of your comfort zone because nothing good today, especially in the space of innovation, gets done in a silo. It requires tons and tons of different input from different folks. So this is a quick example. This is a photo of Forward from the week that we launched the very first clinic. And at Forward, designing this brand new healthcare service was full on the most multidisciplinary effort that I've ever seen. I collaborated with founders, investors, doctors, nurse practitioners, contractors, tech teams, folks that were creating our custom hardware, so a little bit of manufacturing. And we were all super pressed in time. Our timelines were insane. We were shipping in under a year. But even so, I tried to take the time to get to know them, just getting coffee, having a quick 15-minute one-on-one, and truly listening to where they were coming from. Because when you have these conversations, in my case, I started noticing things that I wouldn't have otherwise figured out, which ended up making the end solution a lot stronger. Because I had conversations with doctors that were seeing patients, with nurses that were leveraging our technology, and they were like, this is confusing as hell, and I have no idea what I'm doing. It's okay, let's work on this, right? Let me follow you around, let me do a walkthrough with you, learn how we can make this better together. And for them, it was great too, because it helped them get a better idea of how what they were working on fit, within the whole picture. And this is honestly what made it possible for us to actually launch within 10 months, was just that full-on collaboration. Because in design school, we tend to learn how to empathize with users a lot. Put yourself in the user's shoes and create personas and do a little bit of research to get to know who you're designing for. And we very rarely do this with teammates, and it's just so important. It would be super rare when you get to work on something all by yourself or with people within your immediate team. And then the next one is evolving your skill set. For me, my curiosity and super hyperactive personality, I feel like you've seen me kind of dance around the podium a little bit, I find it really hard to sit still. And over the years, this curiosity has gotten me to explore beyond just traditional industrial design tools. I just love getting my hands on tons of different toys. So I started diving into Unreal Engine, to a little bit of Unity. It was insane and really, really tough. Gravity Sketch, Adobe Aero, Blender, Figma, Procreate, whole tons of random stuff. Because you never know when they're going to become tools in your day-to-day or where they're going to lead you. It's just nice to explore, and it's super, super fun. The tools that we use are crazy fun, and they are so much more intuitive than they used to be 10 years ago. And for me, stuff that started off as a hobby, VR and AR and all that stuff, I used to do that after work just for kicks. But it led to me leading a bunch of different immersive programs at Accenture, for example. And even if it's not for immersive programs, I still leverage those tools, to create things like more immersive visualizations or crafting user journeys where I can bring folks inside of an actual space. And I'm a firm believer that you don't necessarily need to be a master in every single tool. Pick a few that you feel like are going to be your main ones that you're going to leverage over and over again, and obviously, dive super deep into them so that you feel comfortable. But for all the other ones, know them enough. Know them enough to know how to leverage them, and also know them enough to know how other folks in your adjacent teams leverage them, right? You're going to be working with other specialists from other types of disciplines and stuff, and that is invaluable because you'll get a better idea once you start, directing some of these programs about what can and cannot be done, about the capabilities, but also, the guardrails of these types of tools. And I feel very similarly about any new tool that starts coming up. And I know, for example, we hear all the time, every day at least 10 different ways that AI is going to take our jobs and replace everything we do, and it's all doom and gloom. And I get it, because a lot of it is very intimidating. But I think we can kind of turn threats like these into opportunities, because we're not putting that genie back in the bottle, right? And so we might as well learn how to leverage them, and leverage them not to replace what we do, but to enhance what we can do, so that through curiosity, you can have these types of tools and these types of new technologies just become powerful allies in your own workflow. The last lesson is to not be afraid to carve out your own path. As you've seen, my career hasn't been really linear. Never chose to specialize. I started very much as a specialist, but and maybe that path would have been a lot more straightforward for me. But I have found over the years a growing need for this type of adaptable and more generalist approach, especially in tech and innovation. And if any of this resonates with you, I would encourage you to seek out opportunities where no matter where you're at, your skills can bring a big impact. And if these fall outside of your specific role, right? If they're not your specific mandate or what you got hired to do, just, adapt a little bit, learn new tools. And if you see that there's a need currently not being met, just never be afraid to raise your hand and try to tackle it. You'll find helpful people all along the way to kind of, help you out and help you get started, but always raise your hand and always be open to create your own opportunity if that opportunity doesn't exist yet. For me, design has never really been about fitting into a box, because I never found the right box where I fit into. But it's always been about leveraging my own skill set to really focus on solving problems and figure out ways to create value, wherever they may be. And just to close, so we have a little bit of time for any questions, but I will say the field is not easy. It's pretty brutal at times, but it can be incredibly fun and incredibly rewarding. Our work has the power to truly improve lives, which is not something that every single job out there can say. And, for example, at Forward, our design influenced industry leaders, like giant industry leaders like the Kaisers, the Stanfords, even the CVSs of the world, to kind of start thinking in this new way, to start thinking about proactive care, to try to go outside of the status quo, even after the company sunset. When I was working at Accenture, I would go into a bunch of different meetings because one of my focus was healthcare. And I would come into these meetings and they would obviously not even know that I had worked at Forward, but they would bring it up over and over again as a benchmark or source of inspiration, if you will. And it's really rewarding to see that your work doesn't kind of die if a company sunsets. It can kind of live on. Or if, finish a project, it can live on after the project is done. At Dolby, we're like trying to define, the immersive technologies that will create completely new experiences and redefine how we experience entertainment. Like that's really powerful stuff, even though it's not physical or it's not like a product that you can hold in your hand per se. And so that's what drives me, the ability and the space to envision stuff that hasn't been done before, solutions that can potentially make all of our lives a little bit better. Whatever the output ends up being is kind of second tier to me at this point. But my advice is to find what drives you and then stay connected to that and keep looking for opportunities to just keep doing what just fills you with that joy and that fulfillment. Because ultimately, your career is going to be your own to design, right? That's your own design project. So, think about how to build it intentionally, but then leave yourself a little bit of space to kind of iterate as you go. And yeah, with that, if there's any questions, I would love to, chat a little bit more with you guys.
What's that? Yeah. By the way, we have dinner at the Affleck House at 6:30. Is that right?
Yeah, and
Okay.
just so students who are interested in attending, come to me and I'll get your name on the list.
Any questions?
Yeah.
I mean, I think
So that people online can.
Oh, okay.
So I guess, would you still suggest finding like a specialty and then like looking around after that, or would you say like take everything with a general approach from the get-go?
I think it depends on each person really, but I will say that starting off as a specialist was really helpful for me because it kind of gave me some sort of foundation, right? And then I started kind of like diving into different things, which you can start even when you're in college for sure. Take a few classes that are a little bit outside of your major. If you have there's so much content and so much to learn outside of school right now that it's just amazing. Like you can just watch a full series of tutorials and then all of a sudden you're a master in like X, Y, and Z, like 3D software. But I would recommend definitely kind of having a core and then stretching from there. We call that, and especially in consultancies, like being T-shaped. So you kind of have like your foundation and then you stretch your arms like across a couple of different ones. And then start seeing kind of what resonates more with you and like where you feel like you bring the most impact with your own skill set, right? Because in the beginning of your career, and especially in fields like these that just like change and change and change all the time, you might think you're going, towards this path, and then all of a sudden you have a couple of projects and you're like, okay, no, I want to do this forever, and I'm going to specialize in I don't know, designing stuff for hospitality. And that's your path, you know? But I am a pretty big advocate of at least trying other things out first.
Any more questions?
So, I know you just.
Hold on, just wait for the microphone. Sorry.
So, okay, Alex, you touched on AI, and that's the hot topic, isn't it? Really.
Yep.
So, and I'm not going to ask you, how are we going to prepare so we're not so AI is not taking our jobs? That's an old question, but looking at it differently, how can we design for AI? Taking the bull by the horns type of thing, you know, instead of being threatened by it. We're teaching at CCS to embrace it and to absolutely put it on your resume and don't be ashamed. But next level is, how do we embrace it and design for it, as opposed to AI designing our stuff? So, I don't know. So you're in the midst of San Francisco and the tech center of America, and so you're probably surrounded by by this whole thing. So do you have any insights for us, apart from the normal stuff that we talk about AI? Do you have any insights about AI being in your position?
Yeah, I mean, definitely top of mind. I just got back from CES a few weeks ago, and kind of felt like if you didn't have, Gen AI on your booth somewhere, you would get kicked out of the show, because like it's everywhere, and everybody's talking about it, and it's like, and like I mentioned before, like we're not putting the genie back in the bottle. Like this is powerful technology. Like it's only gonna keep getting better and better and better over time. That's like the whole purpose of it. It just learns. And it's intimidating because, if you give it the right prompt and you give it the right input, it'll definitely create a rendering that is like 10 times better than I could pull off in a few hours. It does it in a couple minutes. The way that I've used it is, I guess there's like a couple of different things that I see here as an opportunity for designers like ourselves and stuff. Like on the one hand is like learning how to leverage it as a tool, like in our own workflow. I use it all the time, like all the time. I'm not the best copywriter, and I build so many decks, it will bore anyone. But it's important, obviously, because like part of my job is storytelling. So I leverage it a ton about, I even like brainstorm with it, like how can I say this in a better way, in 5 sentences so I'm not boring someone to death. Or, here's a file with a ton of different insights. I want to create, I feel like there's potential in this and this and that. Does the research or do the insights kind of back this up? But also, creatively, I do leverage it a ton as well. Like I teach it kind of like how to sketch in my own storyboarding style. All of the stuff that I showed here, I just did it by hand. But if I have a super tight deadline and I want to focus on the ideas themselves and not necessarily how beautiful my storyboards are, I'll just use the same prompt that I've trained it to do to kind of like mimic my style a little bit. And then I'll just tweak it, myself, but it gives me a good starting point. So I kind of see it, on the one hand, leveraging it to enhance our workflow, make us more efficient so that we can focus on the ideas themselves and maybe not, the nitty-gritty of getting something perfectly beautiful, but it gives us a good starting point. So there's the tool aspect of it. And then on the other hand is kind of what you bring up, which is somebody's going to have to design how we interact with this stuff. And we're just scratching the surface right now, and the folks that are currently designing these products, like with any new innovation, they tend to be very technical at first, and then once the technology has matured enough, then design comes in, because now it's less intimidating, and now we are like, oh, okay, yeah, it's kind of like when you go back to, a couple of decades ago, and like websites were just getting started, and we saw, crazy rainbow GIFs and, websites that didn't have usability in mind at all, but people were just trying stuff out and throwing darts at a board. I think we're kind of in that stage right now with Gen AI, But pretty soon, I think, for designers that want to start diving into designing how to interact with it, that's going to get really interesting. Like, Gen AI agents are going to be popping up everywhere. Right now, we see little tidbits of them in like chatbots and mainly like customer support. But pretty soon, your car is going to have a version of that. Your phone is going to have another version of that. You go to the doctor's office, and maybe they'll have another version of that. The doctor might have his own version of that. And right now, we don't have a fully set frame of reference of what that's going to be like. And I think that's what's exciting about the space, too, because there's a lot of room, right? If you get designers to join in and have a seat at the table early enough, to have designers, help figure out what that future is going to look like. So I'm excited, obviously, also intimidated, but I think it's going to open up a lot of opportunities that we haven't even thought about.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree. It is exciting and intimidating. I work with it as well. Of course, you have to, but
Yeah.
it's nearly becoming a second brain, and how we interact with AI is either voice command or typing. But I'm imagining it being like an artificial limb.
Could be.
It's like an extra brain. So what if it's kind of like a parrot on your shoulder, but it's okay, so now the way we interact, no. You know about this more than I do, but like interaction is going away from keyboards, more voice now, I guess, but then also it's starting to read your brain waves and stuff. So there's that level, and so it's, I don't know, I just see it becoming a second brain, like an artificial limb or a sternal.
It could be, right? Like soon enough, it's going to be everywhere we look. Whenever we interact with technology, there's going to be intelligence behind it. So, right now we see the images, with Gen AI imagery or Gen AI videos and stuff, but it definitely goes way, way, way beyond that. So yeah, no, I'm interested for sure, and I want to keep learning more about it, obviously, because
But you can't even keep up, can you?
there's so much, right?
It's accelerating.
But I think it's good for us to keep informed and not just kind of, no, I don't believe in it, and I'm going to be like a traditional type of designer, and you can't put horse blinders on. Is kind of where I'm at.
Yeah, totally. We got another question over here.
Oh yeah.
So Alex, it sounds like to me that you have what I call very active listening skills. In other words, really listening to the people, and you're able to, after a while, determine what they need and not necessarily what they want. So can you think of a real quick story of how maybe one might have been one of your most frustrating, or trying to uncover something of actually what was needed by them in the long run and not what they desired?
That is a great question, and I try. Listening is it's so hard. It's way harder than just talking your butt off. But it's really important. I can't think of a single project that I've worked on in the last 10 or so years where I wasn't in a position where I had to bring folks together and find some sort of middle ground. I'll give you okay, here's one example. Just because it was such a far out there type of ask, that even making things tangible and leveraging my usually very visual storytelling skills to bring people together was it was tough. So I was working at Accenture, and it was in the middle of a pandemic. I think I mentioned this project during the presentation, but everybody was freaking out because all of a sudden we were all working remotely via Zoom, and we couldn't be in person anymore. And a lot of our clients were and us internally too, were what's going to happen? Is this the new normal? When is this going to end? What's going to happen if it doesn't end? What's the future of collaboration if we can't be together in the same room? And so some of our folks from leadership were okay, there's something here. And it happens usually with really big consulting companies like Accenture. Once there's a new type of technological innovation, like AI, or in this case it was VR and AR, and just immersive tech, everybody jumps on it. It's like, yeah, the trends are there, the insights are there. We need to like create something in virtual reality. Like this is the future. This is the, and I was in meetings and meetings and meetings of people just talking over each other of like, yeah, we got to be in that room, basically saying kind of the same thing of like the reasons why we needed to explore this, but without really having clear insight on like how to go about it. And so, you know, when we actually, you know, down the road ended up building these experiments for remote collaboration, and we actually, you know, made things real and built the functionality. That process of actually building it was probably like a third of the time that it actually took to get to a direction that we could all align. And part of what works for me and what worked back then was even remotely bringing people together through like workshops and alignment sessions where you kind of act as facilitator in a way to try to avoid people going down rabbit holes really quickly. And I use the timer a lot for that to, you know, not be an asshole and like interrupt people, but like, hey, no, like the timer's off. Okay, let's give somebody else the floor. That helps a lot. I have a ton of different like sort of like IDEO style like human-centered activities to try to get stuff out of people. Brainstorming in different ways other than just like asking a direct question. And you know, the culmination of all of this is what, you know, allowed us to have a clearer direction. But it was very much about me, you know, facilitating these conversations without necessarily having like a very firm opinion, but making that opinion afterwards, after looking at the insights and kind of diving into what they had to say and synthesizing all that information. I will then kind of, you know, if I feel strongly about a direction, I will then kind of defend it. But all the way until then, it's, yeah, I definitely try to listen a lot more than talk. Also, because in a lot of these conversations, I'm not the expert in the field. You know, I'm talking to C-suite level people that have been doing this their whole life, or, you know, talking to like senior technologists, and, you know, it's definitely more about learning and like listening more so than like, no, let me tell you what would be like great for your company. So that's been, working at a consulting company, I think really like helped me get to that point, because I'm also like even if you guys can't believe it, I'm very introverted, super introvert. So I definitely have to like come out of my shell during these types of sessions. And yeah, I don't know if I rambled like for like 5 minutes here, but does that kind of like get to, okay.
Any more questions? I've got one question. I was wondering how collaboration and adaptability has really kind of set you up for being a leader at this point in your career.
Yeah, super important. Like, I think it is like the most important, I think, muscle that we have to flex. It's great if you're an awesome artist and you can sketch anything with your eyes closed, and it's great if you know how to model in like 5 different types of 3D modeling software. It's awesome. If you want to go the specialist route. If you want to be more of a generalist and work across teams, if you don't collaborate, you don't get anywhere. Like, it's just not going to happen. And it's something that you have to kind of flex over time. Like, it doesn't happen overnight. Obviously, whenever I work with my immediate team and we talk shop and we can, you know, like kid around and whatever, and it's like the folks that I see every day, it's 10 times easier, right? You almost read your mind. But in technology, you will never get anywhere if you just focus in design. Like, there's so many things that go into any sort of product or service or, you know, whatever it may be. And so it kind of goes back to listening before speaking also, and trying to learn where folks are coming from and establish those types of conversations. It just goes a long way. Like, I don't think any of the projects that I've worked on are just purely design-led. And yeah, ever since I started working at Frog, for the most part, it's all been 24/7 collaboration. Cool. Anyone else? All right. Well, thank you. Thank you guys for having me.